Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. This webinar aims to provide information about going to the field with MSF as a logistician. I would like, and we would like as MSF Australia, to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to the elders both past and present. This land was and always will be Aboriginal land. In recognition that we are a binational association, I also take this opportunity to say kia ora to our colleagues joining from Aotearoa, New Zealand. My name is Jackie Clark and I'm part of the field recruitment team with MSF Australia. This evening we are joined by Thomas Hing, an aeronautical engineer who worked as a supply chain manager in the Ukraine in 2021 and until recently in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. Thanks for joining us, Thomas.
Thank you for having me, Jackie.
I spoke with Thomas recently when he was working in Bangladesh, and we will watch this pre-recorded interview in a moment, following which I'll briefly talk to recruitment processes followed by the opportunity to ask questions of Thomas or myself. Before we go any further, I would like to explain the term logistician. This is a bit of a catch-all term used by MSF and includes construction managers, water and sanitation specialists, electricians, civil engineers, architects, supply chain management, IT, radio and communication specialists, and mechanics. And we'll talk more about that later. Please start sending through any general questions via the MSF website, YouTube or Facebook page. And note we are unable to answer any questions about your individual suitability tonight. If we run out of time to answer all your questions during the webinar, we will do so afterwards. So let's move now to watch the video of my recent conversation with Thomas. Well, welcome, Thomas. Thanks for joining us. Thomas, I introduced you as a logistician, but you've done many other things. Could you tell us how an aeronautical engineer with an MBA came to be working with MSF?
Well, hello, Jackie. Thanks for having me. I know it does seem a little strange for someone of my background to be working at MSF, but in my short time with MSF, I've already worked with an ex-professional rally car driver, a business owner who ran an audiovisual company and, believe it or not, a jumping castle hire company, and also the head mechanic of a motorcycle team that won the Dakar Rally. So when you look at my background from this perspective, I'm pretty bland. But I think everyone joining MSF has their own story or path to MSF. And for me, it was simply just wanting to give back to those less fortunate and beyond the financial donations, but to give back in a bit more of a direct way. Although I've had an engineering background, I've spent most of my career in supply chain and procurement. And when I found out that MSF had a need for logisticians, including professionals of my background, I felt it was a natural choice to make.
That's great. Well, what are the key skills from this background that you apply in the field?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I graduated from university in 2004 and had about slightly over 15 years work experience in supply chain and procurement before joining MSF. And without a doubt, there are two key skills that I use every single day without fail. And those are my technical supply chain and procurement skills and also my people management skills. Regarding the technical side, I've relied a lot on my spend analytics experience to understand what goods and services the mission needs to keep running, and also my supply chain analytics experience to ensure the warehousing and transportation configuration suits the mission. I think it's pretty much fair to say that I've used all the skills I've built up before MSF. Sometimes I find myself right down in the weeds doing tasks that I just did a few years out of uni, or sometimes I'm developing a high-level strategy that I did in my previous managerial position. So I've been using the whole breadth of my technical experience. Regarding people management skills, this is going to be applicable to everyone. In both my missions, I worked in countries where I didn't speak the language, I didn't understand the culture, and the humanitarian industry was completely new for me. It's exhausting to keep your emotional intelligence on high constantly, but you can't work effectively without it. MSF is an organisation that truly brings together people from all over the globe, so the ability to work with people who are entirely different from you is very important.
Could you tell us about your first assignment with MSF in the Ukraine last year?
Yeah, sure. Just for everyone's context, before the current 2022 military escalation, the conflict was confined to eastern Ukraine, where the front line, or what we call the contact line between Ukraine and other military forces, were relatively fixed. There was officially a ceasefire in place, but while I was there were on average about 400 to 600 ceasefire violations per month, with many villages along the contact line the place for battles and skirmishes between the two forces. So MSF was there to simply provide medical services to the civilians living in that area who quite simply had nowhere else to go. So when I went to Ukraine as the person responsible for supply chain and procurement, this was essentially to ensure our medical operations and support teams had everything they needed to keep running. This includes some gloves, paracetamol, to car tires, ultrasounds, washing powder, HIV antiretroviral drugs, to generators, and basically anything you can think of. Things were either bought locally or imported. Then we had to have an effective supply chain to bring those goods to our teams along the contact line. With Ukraine being so close to Western Europe, getting the goods wasn't so much the challenge, but in this case, for me, it was maintaining a safe and effective supply chain within a conflict zone. It involved a lot of communication to ensure the main actors in the area were very aware of our planned movements and also having up-to-date information about minefield locations. I got really lucky with my first mission, I have to say, as I had an amazing team of national staff that were highly motivated and I could trust them to get the job done. I really could keep going much longer on this, Jackie, but I know we're conscious of time, so I won't add anything more, but I really hope that gives a bit of a flavour.
Yeah, it really does, just to understand the everyday, the real challenges being in a war zone. Now, Thomas, what about that was your first mission, but what about where you are right now? What's your current role look like?
Yeah, so my current role was essentially the same as my first role, but in a totally different context. So I'm now in Bangladesh, in a district called Cox's Bazar. And to give everyone a bit of context, in late 2017 and early 2018, there was a huge influx of Rohingya refugees that fled Myanmar across the border to Bangladesh. They settled in an area of Bangladesh that was mostly jungle and farming communities with very little infrastructure. But now this area has turned into the world's largest refugee camp, and MSF is providing medical services to those refugees. As it's one of the world's largest, or it is the world's largest refugee camp, just about every NGO that exists is operating there. And the main challenge for me in my role is operating in such a densely populated area of the world. To give everyone an idea, the camp's population density is twice that of the most densely populated country in the world. And this is all
crazy.
Yeah. And this is all without multi-story accommodation. Every building is pretty much a single-story building. So as you can imagine, there are people absolutely everywhere.
So sorry, just to interrupt. What's the land space that it takes up the camp?
Yeah, it's about 13 square kilometres is the main camp, which we call the mega camp.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just that density is quite something to try and get your head around.
Yeah, it is. It's very hard, and I could only understand it once I arrived there. And for me, from a supply chain perspective, it really creates particular challenges. For example, when replacing a generator supplying electricity to one of our hospitals, as it was being delivered, the delivery truck actually broke down in the middle of the camp. And as this was a critical activity, you simply can't run a hospital without electricity. And I was on the ground supervising everything very closely. And as you can imagine, the broken truck generated a lot of interest from the refugees and quickly became a crowd control situation. And this is all during a scabies outbreak in the camp. And for those who aren't aware, scabies is a skin condition caused by an infestation of mites, which is highly transmissible. So not the most ideal environment to be doing ad hoc crowd control.
A lot for you to think about in that moment.
Yeah, it is. It is. But look, again, I did get lucky. With the limited staff I had with me, we did manage to keep people away from the truck, the other vehicle we had, and also ourselves. And we discovered the truck couldn't be fixed that day. It needed a major repair. So what I had to do is I had to ask the camp military that I suppose guards the camp to also guard the truck and generator overnight, while to basically give us time to find another truck. And at the end of the day, everything ended well. But I think this situation just really goes to show anything can happen in a humanitarian context.
It really can, and I think what this really shows is your people skills and the need to be able to negotiate and communicate really effectively with a range of people to deal with whatever comes up.
Yeah, that's totally correct.
Yeah. And now, Thomas, look, I know there's not a typical day with MSF, but could you give us a brief run through what your day looks like?
Yeah, as you said, there certainly isn't a typical day at MSF, but to give everyone realistic expectations, some days can look exactly like a day in a Sydney office. You wake up, have some breakfast, you get to the office, and you just spend the entire day on emails, paperwork, and meetings. And sometimes you can be stuck in the office the entire day and not even see the sun outside. And that's the real that can be a real day, and you can have lots of them. Other days, you're out in the field, for me, supervising the unloading of 3,500 boxes containing life-saving drugs while it's pouring down with rain. And look, other days, you can accidentally discover the water treatment plant in one of your hospitals has stopped working. And for lack of resources, which is quite common in the NGO sector, especially MSF, you suddenly become the de facto water and sanitation manager in charge of rapidly rectifying the situation. So you can be quickly pushed outside of your comfort zone. And other days, especially in this mission, I had to fly to the capital of Bangladesh, which in this case is Dhaka, to tell one of our suppliers that MSF wouldn't be paying him a single cent as he delivered tens of thousands of dollars of fake goods. And this is it's a particularly interesting situation, and I think it's quite common in the contexts that MSF operates in. You really have to be on top of your supply chain.
And look, you've touched a lot on supply chain, but can you tell me why it's so critical for MSF to have strong supply chain management?
Yeah, sure. I think, look, given the world news over the recent months covering the general global supply chain crisis, I think everyone's heard of that. And as a consequence, everyone's now very aware of how important it is to get, quite simply, the right goods to the right place at the right time. And that's simply what supply chain is. And ultimately, medical facilities like those of MSF rely on literally thousands of different types of goods to run. And the supply chain management was all about making sure these facilities get what they need. And an experienced MSFer told me on my first assignment, maybe to scare me a little bit and have some fun, but he said, you don't want to be the guy who's running supply chain when the operating theatre generator runs out of fuel in the middle of the life-saving operation. And that sort of stuck with me, and that scares me every few days.
Yeah. Just again, I suppose we'll just interrupt just for a sec. I think it just does highlight how critical the role of the logistician is in an MSF project, because traditionally, we hear a lot about the medical side of things, but actually they can't do anything without the logisticians. So, as this case demonstrates.
That's totally correct. And I think, I know those examples I gave before might sound a bit like an exaggeration, but as you mentioned, Jackie, MSF operates in environments where there is a huge lack of infrastructure. So the things we take for granted in Australia, MSF has to provide on its own. For example, MSF needs to provide its own electricity, its own water, its own mechanics, basically everything you need to run a medical facility. And it's incredibly difficult, or practically impossible just to go on the internet and find a supplier or subcontractor to do those things for you. So that's really when the role of the logistician comes in to do all those other critical non-medical activities.
There's a key thing in every role in MSF, but also in yours, and that's training. And really, you know, as we mentioned, nothing happens in an MSF project without logistical support. So if you could just tell us a little bit about what the training might look like.
Yeah, I think the training in MSF is really no different from any other large organisation. You know, if you're in a managerial position, like a lot of international staff are, you know, a large part of your job is training and coaching. You know, every day you're guiding the team, giving them tips on how to improve, and you're also learning from them because the local staff have been there for a long time and they can give you a lot more context. So there's constantly informal training both ways. I've also done some formal supply chain and procurement training sessions on my assignments where I've just spent a bit of time preparing some materials and organised time to meet with my team and really just go through it and run a normal training session. It's really up to you, and it's no different from any other large organisation. MSF also has a formal training program where there are courses offered in Australia and overseas. And that will really depend on your chosen career path in MSF. So I can't really provide too much more information other than that it does exist. And the courses that I've done, I found really good and really applicable to the humanitarian context. It's really helped grow my professional skills in ways that I couldn't have by just working in Sydney.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's great to know that, you know, you can have that learning and development in the field. And then also just to point out that MSF does offer both internal and external courses as well once you've done a project or two to further your skills and help progress your career.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that really that I didn't know about prior to joining MSF, and it's really makes a big difference.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And then, look, you've mentioned the international team, living in the shared house, diverse nationalities and cultures. We know it can, you know, it's more often than not a stressful context. How do you approach, you know, on a personal level, dealing with those challenges, Thomas?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question in the sense that you really have to know yourself, and working with MSF really does help you learn more about yourself. And as you mentioned, working in the field with MSF is truly a multicultural experience. Everyone has different expectations and everyone has different ways of working. So, you know, even on assignments where English is the mission language, and those are both the missions I've been on, for most people, English is their second language, so it can be very difficult to communicate at times. Believe it or not, I had to use Google Translate multiple times a day just to communicate properly with my French manager when I was in Ukraine, and that was a really interesting experience.
Did you learn a little bit of French, Thomas?
I tried to, but she always made fun of my accent. But so I just made fun of her English accent. So yeah. it went both ways. Yeah, look, you do pick up lots of words of all different types of languages, and yeah, Google Translate can be your best friend at times.
You're lucky to have it. Yeah, that's great.
And you know, I think you asked earlier about how I deal with it. I think simply you just have to be very flexible on everything. You know, and there is no single approach that works, and it just comes back down to that flexibility. So don't get attached to anything. Don't get stuck in your ways, and just go with the flow, because you just don't know what the accommodation and what the living circumstances is going to be like. And for example, you know, you really need to be particularly patient with yourself. And you know, one day when we got back from the field, there wasn't electricity at the MSF house, and everyone was at their limits after a long day because, you know, there was no air conditioning, and believe it or not, 7 p.m. it was still 35 degrees and 90% humidity. So all I can say is in that environment, just take a few deep breaths and relax the best you can.
Yeah, no, good advice.
Yeah.
And look, I know you can't name names, but could you talk to us a little bit about your local colleagues and why they're so critical to MSF projects?
Sure. In our projects, MSF's national staff make up around 80% of all staff members. And MSF, quite simply, couldn't operate without them. They play a key role in operational continuity. And what I mean by this is international staff like me, we come and go and often aren't there for a long time. And a lot of the local staff they have been there for quite a number of years. So they have a lot of knowledge and maintain that continuity when a new international staff member arrives. And also, like any large group of people, every national staff has a different motivation for joining MSF. Now, I really can't stress that enough. Some join for the humanity, some join because MSF is the only employer in the area, and some join for the career progression and monetary purposes, as MSF can pay very, very well compared to local salaries. So it's really important from a people management perspective that you understand each of your staff members' motivations when you're managing your team. But as a result, if you do manage to establish strong relationships with national staff, it's not only good for, obviously, the team's productivity, but you often socialize with them outside of working hours. They might invite you to their house for a meal or for a particular celebration. And this really adds to the overall MSF experience. But you really have to ensure if you really balance that tightrope of professional work relationship and a friendship, because you don't want to be seen favouring one staff member over another.
Yeah, absolutely. You do get to have exposure to people and a culture that you just wouldn't in any other way. You're certainly a long way from what you experience as a tourist. So it's kind of a unique working experience in that regard.
Yeah, 100%. I wouldn't even compare it to being a tourist. It's a completely different experience.
Yeah. Absolutely. And look, field workers often say that what they love about working with MSF is that you just never know what a day will bring. And look, there can be a certain adrenaline rush. There's no doubt it takes a lot of energy and resilience. What is it that keeps you going back to this kind of work, Thomas?
Yeah, look, I'll probably start with a bit of a joke, because I've noticed that there's a joke in MSF, which I've heard a few times from various people, that it's you always swear that your current mission is your last until you're back for your next mission. And I've met on this on my mission in Bangladesh, I actually met someone who told me she said that for the last 8 missions she's been on, and she's genuinely sworn to herself saying that this is going to be 100% my last mission. But then after she goes back home and has a bit of time, she goes, "Yep, I'm going to come back." And I think, and I've been in this in this space before, and I think everyone in MSF has been in this space. And I think it's because while you're on mission, you can really feel burnt out and exhausted. And MSF, like any large organization, can really frustrate and infuriate you at times. But once you come back home and have a bit of a break, time to decompress, relax, take a step back, you realize how rewarding the work is to yourself. And more importantly, how your job makes a big difference to those in need. But really ultimately, it comes down to your own motivation. For me, it's my internal motivation, which I mentioned earlier, of wanting to give back. And that keeps me coming back to MSF. So I'd really encourage everyone listening just to give it a crack. And you might end up hating it, or you might end up loving it, and you'll only know once you give it a go.
Fantastic. Thanks, Thomas. I'll come back to Thomas shortly for the Q&A, but we'll just speak briefly on the recruitment processes. Currently, MSF has significant demand for supply chain managers like Thomas, but we also particularly need construction managers, water and sanitation specialists, electricians, civil engineers and architects. We need adaptable professionals who enjoy working in a team and who are up for new challenges. And it is valuable for MSF to attract people who are interested in building a career with us. There are many opportunities with MSF, including support for training and career development. For instance, Thomas is joining us now from Bordeaux, France, after completing the supply technical training in MSF France's training facility. And we might talk more to that later, Thomas. We will be sending you a follow-up email with key links to our website, but I would highlight that apart from meeting the general essential criteria, you need to have practical skills and experience in at least one, but preferably two of the following areas: construction and renovation, procurement and supply chain management, warehousing and stock management, water sanitation and waste management, energy and electricity, mechanics, IT and network maintenance, radio and communications. Now, I know these are diverse fields, so I emphasise we're looking for expertise in at least one, but preferably two. And it is essential to be able to work in the field for a minimum of 9 months. Assets include experience in administration, project and team management, budget management, use of computer applications, and experience with pump and generator maintenance. To apply, complete the application and skills assessment form on our website. Once we receive your application, it will be technically assessed, and if you meet the criteria, you will be invited to interview, generally within 4 weeks of applying. Following the interview, there are several other recruitment steps, including reference checks, medical and police checks, and successful completion of the MSF pre-departure course. Welcome to MSF. Once you're officially recruited into the pool of field workers, it may take a while to be matched to a placement and mobilised to the field. There are many variables given the difficult contexts in which MSF works. However, tonight is about maximising your opportunity to ask any questions. So let's move to the Q&A. Thomas, we've had a question on why you applied to MSF. Would you mind sharing with us your personal motivation?
Sure. So the reason why I applied for MSF is pretty simple. I think, living in Australia, and I've also lived in New Zealand as well, given the standard of living in those countries and the access to healthcare, I just feel very lucky to be able to live in a country such as Australia. And it's really through no doing of my own. It's just a bit of luck, depending where you're born and which family you're born into. So it's my personal motivation is simply just to do a small part in making the world a little bit more equal and spreading that, I suppose, the access to medical services a bit more broadly.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great to hear. We've had a question from Dale on YouTube, and he asks, after an initial deployment, does MSF offer any additional training programs that might broaden a logistician's skill set to meet current MSF demands? And look, initial training before departure is quite broad. The Welcome to MSF training I mentioned just a minute ago. Once you've been in the role, there can be more specific learning opportunities. And Thomas, you might just very briefly speak to the training you just finished yesterday. What is it called? Yes. What was it called in the first instance?
So it's supply technical training. This is the MSF name for so the general technical supply chain training. So it covers procurement, supply chain, warehouse management, all those sorts of things. And what I found really interesting about the training is obviously the content was really good, but the fact that it brings together different MSF professionals from all over the world to train together. And that's a huge part of the learning experience because each mission is so different. And, I've only done 2 missions and everyone else in the course has done about 2 missions as well. But just speaking to them, you realize how different every single mission is. So the training is great on a technical level and as well as just opening your eyes a bit more and understanding the breadth of MSF. Yeah,
great. It must be so good just to be face to face with people in a training after all this time too. Yeah. Now, look, have you seen other opportunities with MSF that you might have for career progression?
Yeah, I think, look, MSF is quite similar to any sort of large multinational company. So for the people who are watching who are currently working or have previously worked in those sorts of companies, it's fairly similar in the sense that you know, after every mission, you have a performance review with your supervisor, and and depending on the outcome of that performance review, it really dictates the next role that you might be eligible for. That's one part of it, but I think another part of career progression is availability, because after coming back from a mission, you might want several months to rest, or you want to catch up with family, spend time with friends as well. And depending on when you say you're available, it depends on what roles happen to be available at that time. So there's quite a few moving pieces when you talk about career progression. But I suppose to answer the question, yes, there certainly is opportunity for career progression in MSF.
Fantastic. And I just want to mention that we had a very nice comment from Lindsay saying how much he enjoyed the interview. And then just thank you, Lindsay, appreciate your kind words. And then we had a question from Raphael. Is a first mission or assignment restricted to 12 months, or can it be extended? And look, it's not usually extended except under exceptional circumstances. And 9 months is, the basic that we would be looking for, the minimum for a logistician. And thank you. I think, that's it for our questions tonight. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to be in touch. I would like to say a very big thank you to Thomas and to all of you for joining us. We really hope you found it helpful. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you, Jackie. Thanks for having me.
We look forward to seeing your applications. And as I mentioned, we'll be in touch with a follow-up email with the links to our website. Thank you.